the 13-foot giant, which was the one that the Native Americans, including in addition to Buffalo Bill Cody, spoke about, he's 13 feet tall. So, and then we got the giant skull, and I have another surprise there for people that I think will be pretty mind-blowing. So I'll keep that one secret. But when they come in, I mean, just the logistics of moving a 13-foot tall giant and getting it, it takes 4 guys, it takes a pulley system. But to put it into perspective, you and I can talk about giants on coast to coast, and you can even do artist sketches. But when you stand next to a sculptor, and this is a large 3-dimensional sculptor, that everything is anatomically sized to the correct, if you will, morphological symmetry. They know that the head is this position of the body, blah, 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 the percentage of the arms, the length of the arms, etc. And you stand next to the thing, and then you understand that in 1877 in Montgomery, Alabama, 300 individuals saw this 21-foot giant, and his mouth was triangular, his eyes were reptilian, his tusks, T-U-S-K-S, like walrus tusks. And what's interesting, Tom, about that, years ago, somebody tracked down some African pots in the jungles of, I think, maybe the Congo, and they showed these creatures that were 21 feet tall with tusks holding a full mature lion, almost similar to the Babylonian and the Sumerian stelae, by its hind legs. So that's what's going to be at Branson, and I want people to understand. The point is being able to reference this, because when you quote, obviously the Septuagint, what is it, Isaiah 13, it is Isaiah 13, isn't it? Giants are coming.
Yep.
The thing is that people can't understand it. So here you have the cover-up. Can you help me here to explain to people how significant an eyewitness to the Smithsonian cover-up is when hundreds of newspapers talked about giant skeletons, all going to the Smithsonian, and to this day they still deny it?
Well, absolutely. It's the Powell doctrine. Wesley Powell wound up in the position of doing all of the archaeological research between the Grand Canyon, the Four Corners of the United States of America. And at a time when that one article that you sent, where they're talking about capturing a living giant, at that same time, there were university professors, and it wasn't just singular professors doing independent work. These were whole teams of archaeologists that were being sent out from universities in the United States, and they were doing very careful archaeological research, and they were digging up the bones and bodies of giants that had been buried. Now, we don't know exactly why the indigenous Americans buried them under these large mounds. We don't know if it was reverence. We don't know if it was part of their religious belief system. We're not exactly sure. There's all kind of theories. You and I investigated some of those theories in the book, Unearthing the Lost World of the Cloud Eaters. When you and I and Timothy and our whole team on both sides, from Skywatch and also Gen 6, we went to the Four Corners last year. We met with the tribal leaders. These weren't Johnny-come-latelys. These were governors of nations. This in Mahudi was literally for 20-some years the head of tribal affairs to the U.S. government. So we met with the A-list of the tribes, and even they had their own theories around why these humans of enormous structure were buried beneath these giant mounds. But in any case, in early American history, the late 1800s, the early 1900s, they were being dug up all over the U.S. And it was not uncommon to find the bones of giant skeletons that were 9 feet tall, 10 feet tall, some of them 12 feet tall, a few of them like 18 feet tall, really. The recreation that we're going to have at Branson, how tall is that?
13 feet.
So 13 feet would have been one of the average skeletons. And wait until you get to Branson, and you're going to want to get your picture next to it. How how that will put into perspective what was being dug up all across the United States of America. So, if you read our book, Unearthing the Lost World of the Cloud Eaters, there's a whole chapter in there on the Great Smithsonian cover-up. If you don't want to do that, just go to Google and type it in, and there's large pages out there on the Internet you can read that describe how the Smithsonian, under the Powell Doctrine, Wesley Powell, was sent out basically with an agenda to cover up the discovery of all these giant bones, to confiscate them, to buy them, to do whatever they had to do. Little museums were popping up in different towns around the United States with these giant bone structures, and the Smithsonian would come in. If they couldn't get the proprietors to sell them these giant skeletons, they would buy the museum, close it down, but they were spiriting away. And this isn't, by the way, just Tom Horn and Steve Quayle and conspiratists talking. Academics, both inside the indigenous American universities and so on, have written about this for some time. So what happened was, around the time that Steve Quayle and I took our teams, went to the Four Corners, through a series of circumstances I won't take time to explain, we met a man that was a former curator of an American Indian museum, and he was friends with all these people. And we asked him, is there any possibility we could get a sit-down with somebody from the Smithsonian? And I think he did try, and he actually talked to a guy that's in his 80s now that lives in New Mexico that was like almost legendary at the Smithsonian. And that guy had agreed, by the way. He agreed. We write about this in our book. He agreed that the time has come for the Smithsonian to be transparent about the remains of skeletal, very, very large humans, as he called them, that are in some of these different, what are they? They're like Indiana Jones warehouses or whatever, right?
Yes, they're warehouses, 100 yards long, 100 yards annexes off of each of it, and 4 levels deep, and that's just one of them.
And he admitted that there are literally tens of millions of artifacts of all kinds, but including the remains of giants, that are cataloged away in some of these warehouses. Now, there are political reasons why the Smithsonian wants to keep that covered up today, because if it was made known that they have these, then the tribes could sue them for possession of those bones under laws that were passed during the Bush administration I don't know what they call it, repatriation, whatever it is, but to take them and bury them back in their native soils. And so but that's really the smaller reason. The bigger reason, as we learned through the Powell Doctrine, as to why they don't want people to be aware of these bones, is because it contradicts the Darwinian evolutionary theory. The idea that we all started out as amoebas and crawled up out of the mud and were tiny, and we were that lizard that sells insurance on TV, and eventually we went from that to something bigger and bigger and bigger, and finally we became the modern day Homo sapien. When you see giants that were anywhere from 8 or 9 feet tall to 20 feet tall or even taller, it totally contradicts that theory. The other thing it does that the Smithsonian doesn't like is not only does it dispute Darwinianism, it supports the biblical narrative, and that's the part they hate. It actually supports the history as it is contained within the Bible. There were giants in those days and also after that. So when you come to the conference in Branson, or if you buy the live streaming and you're able to view everything that's happening there, you're going to get to see literally giants on display. Now, by the way, you have a skull that is going to be there, and this is based on measurements from the conquistadors, right?
Correct, and the actual measurements, because listen, when Rome conquered South America, they wanted to make sure they got every last doubloon, every last ounce of silver, or whatever measurement of silver or gold. But they were so exact in their measurements, they used a rapier, the Spanish rapier that when they put it into the eye socket of this skull that people will see at Branson, the 42-inch rapier blade touched the back of the skull. It didn't break it. It just touched it. So the thing is, to get a feel for that, ladies and gentlemen, the giants before the flood of Noah were obviously larger than the ones after. And by the way, Tom, that act is called the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. And that's called the NAGPRA. No, I had to remind myself, but I've had listeners that are listening to this show tonight, I guarantee it, that have found giant skeletons in their farmland in Ohio and, the different areas, Illinois, and literally had the three-letter people show up because they told the postmaster. Postmaster gets on a phone, calls the FBI. They come in, and this group was threatened with their lives, this family. You forget you ever saw it. You do not speak of it, or bad things will happen to you. And I said, were you fearful for your very life? They said, Steve, they made it clear. Yes, we were. So this is why, and there's another reason now, Tom, and I'm going to be talking about this at Branson. Lawrence Livermore National Labs just came out with a new testing on bone, not actionable DNA, but actual bone. The bone memory, we hear of muscle memory, we hear of genetic memory, but Lawrence Livermore National Lab came out with a way now and to trace back, you ready for this, based on just bones, the inherited characteristics. They can trace back the origin, if you will, or the genetic origin of this. You know what this means. You get giant bones, you can trace it back, and they're going to come up with genomes that are, pun intended, out of this world. So knowing that, they're going to try and frustrate that by all means. And that clicked for me when I read that article. I go, now I get it, because I didn't, number one, know the technology existed until a couple months ago, and number two, then it makes sense. Not only are they hating the narrative, the biblical narrative, not only do they want to not give up on the Darwinian evolution, but now, I wonder if this will click for people. You can track the origin of the offspring, you can actually track the origin of the giants to specific fallen angel DNA, which I am under the impression and have been told that yes, there is already libraries of that. That's what the Human Genome Project was all about, or it may have been to just map the human genome. But at the end of the day, the giants, when they were slaughtered, in the book of Enoch, bring forth the bastards and slaughter them? Now, that's in the book of Enoch. It's not talking about Washington, D.C. at this point. But the point is that... Well,
Steve, I think the last time you and I were on Hagman and Hagman, we talked about how just then different news reports had been published on I wish I could think of the name of it. It doesn't matter. But research institutes connected to the federal government who were funding a massive study through our universities. And specifically they're looking for DNA connected to gigantism. And the whole question was raised about what is their fascination with the idea of gigantism? I mean, there are trillions of diseases they could be studying. Why do they want to know what type of genetic marker ultimately leads to gigantism in humans? So it was very, very curious. But having said that, kudos to you, because getting back and finishing my statement about the Powell Doctrine and what we did when we were in the Four Corners and all of that, our museum curator, who had thought that he was going to be able to get us a sit-down, and he did get one of the legendary figures from the Smithsonian, who also agreed that the time was right and we could now approach the Smithsonian. Bottom line is it didn't happen. And it didn't happen, and I'll be frank, I'll be honest with the audience. It didn't happen because they looked into me and they looked into you. And they said, no way. There ain't no way because Steve Quayle and his friend Tom Horn, if they got a sit down in which we admitted that we are in possession of these giant skeletal remains, there is no way they're not taking this into media and broadcasting it from the hilltops. So no way it's going to happen.